One of the most pervading and destructive myths about New African people is that we have always been passive, praying cyphers, nobodies, waiting for somebody influenced by a foreign experience to come teach us how to defend ourselves and make revolution. The unspoken narrative goes that we were simply a defenseless, innocent people sitting in Mississippi and Alabama hovels moaning, "Slave, slave," until one of us read Lenin, and then, magically, we learn how to fight back. Of course, we have always, as a people, known that this is false, a racist, infantilizing myth. We have never needed anybody, never mind a white man from Russia or Germany or anywhere else, to teach us how to defend ourselves and our gains. On the contrary, we instinctively distrust anyone from outside who claims to have the keys to a new Jerusalem. When we read Marx or Lenin, and when we incorporate their frameworks into our analysis, we are doing so with the express intent and purpose of liberating our people from capitalism-imperialism, nothing more. This is a pragmatic engagement, not an idealistic one. We leave celebrating the 100 or 150th or what have you birthday of Stalin and Marx to the white sects. We have heroes of our own to commemorate. We celebrate Malcolm X, Huey P. Newton, and Harriet Tubman because they are of us and by us. We study Marx and Engels and others only to the extent that they are relevant to us in our experience. We commemorate them as we commemorate Isaac Newton or Albert Einstein, synthesizers and discoverers of essential laws of reality and being, but not as godheads. We have always known that we will make our own revolution with or without outside help. This knowledge is confirmed by the lesson and experience of Cyril Briggs in the African Blood Brotherhood, which could accurately be described as the first fighting communist organization of the new African proletariat in the United States. Cyril Briggs was an Afro-Caribbean born on the sunny, sweet Isle of Nevis in 1888. He immigrated to New York City in 1905, following many of his countrymen and women looking for work in the belly of the beast. This is a trend followed by many in the Third World to this very day. You see, imperialism rots the economic structures of countries like the Philippines, Jamaica, Nigeria, and Egypt. Thus, the people of these nations are forced to travel to the imperialist metropoles of Europe and the United States to be exploited directly, leaving their families and friends in countries behind to toil for a pittance, driving the imperialist cabs, enduring the imperialist laundry. A similar process is what drove the internal migration of new African people from the national territory in the south to the industrial countries in the north, beginning with the end of chattel slavery and reaching a peak in the 1920s and 30s. Back to Briggs. He was a talented journalist and worked for a variety of black publications, most notably the New York Amsterdam News. He began to make a name for himself as an analyst and theoretician of what was at the time referred to as the Negro problem, promoting organization as the beginning of the remedy of the struggles that we faced as a people. Briggs wrote in 1918, "In the face of the fact that the white race, nor in truth any other race, has ever been just in its dealings with unorganized and therefore weak peoples, it would seem that Negro leaders who are expected to be versed in the human records called history would hesitate to offer seriously such a situation or solution as simple justice, yet a sea of talk has been sent out along this line and much good mental energy wasted. The end of the war is in sight." By the war, Briggs is referring to World War I. "In the sharp industrial competition which will follow the war, and which was on the way, war or no war, the Negro race in America and in the subtropical sections of Africa will face annihilation and economic death unless protected economically, as other and wiser races have seen fit to protect themselves, by the ownership of territories large and rich enough in resources to supply present needs and guarantee future requirements. All the dead and dying races were not conquered by the sword. Many were victims of economic warfare. For years, the white man has been assiduously finching off the earth while the darker races slept. The vast dominion of Canada, the illimitable expanse of Siberia, the entire continent of Australia have been fenced off to supply the future territorial needs of the white race, while at the present moment supporting puny white populations who, backed by mother relations in Europe, plainly tell the colored races to keep out, that they will have none of them, that these vast territories, once the habitat of colored races, and capable of supporting millions upon millions of human beings, are to be held by sparse white populations, backed by militant Europe for white posterity. Here we have an example of the white man looking hundreds of years into the future and taking steps now to safeguard the white men of a far distant future day. His action is wise and deserves applause from white men. To Negroes, however, his action is a menace and from them deserves the sharpest and swiftest opposition. In the economic war that is to follow the war that is, in fact, already upon us, Negroes in countries dominated by a numerically superior white population will be at a deadly disadvantage. Ownership and control of large and rich territories is necessary to safeguard the existence of our race and to guarantee it political equality and justice and the freest opportunity for development. Without control of resources, we are lost. Only the race that is in possession and control of such resources can hope to survive the stern economic competition of the future. This is Briggs writing a column for, I believe, the Amsterdam News, and this is titled The American Race Problem. So we see an economic, political, and a military analysis. Briggs argues that new African people, black people in the diaspora, should not simply sit in moral condemnation of Europeans for engaging in imperialism. That is what they are doing to preserve their posterity and ensure material prosperity for themselves. Briggs sees this as a dog-eat-dog world where there are objective winners and objective losers. The Europeans, through superior military force and organization, have, according to Briggs, conquered the world and shaped it to their will. Briggs' prescription is for Africans in the diaspora to get organized as soon as possible and secure resources to ensure the continued existence of ourselves as a people by military means. Once again, we see a black revolutionary correctly highlighting the primary contradiction. At the American level, the primary contradiction is between oppressed nationality peoples and a settler colonial state. This is why the struggle for communism in the United States always gets hung up on the race-national question, and those who fail to grasp this contradiction always end up firmly on the right opportunist path, if not becoming outwardly and openly racist and social fascist. The major example of this is the Revolutionary Communist Party of the United States, also known as the RevCom, and yes, Revolutionary Communist is in big, bad, scary quotes. This party traffics in the struggles of the black nation for its own petty prestige while ignoring the main issues impacting our people, while it's also positing the reactionary white revisionist Bob Avakian as the most important revolutionary of our time. Another error that many make is downplaying the importance of nationalism, the revolutionary desire for nationhood, in the coming of many colonized people to communism. The national policy of the Comintern in the Soviet Union played a bigger role in the development of communism as a material force among the people of countries and nations oppressed by imperialism than any vague reference to some New Jerusalem in the hereafter did. We adopted communism because it showed us how to struggle for the liberation of our peoples and our nations. Ho Chi Minh spoke on this, as did Mao. Colonized people pick up Marxism, Leninism, Maoism to free our people from imperialist bondage and slavery. Briggs, in a 1958 letter to Theodore Draper, wrote, "My interest in communism was inspired by the national policy of the Russian Bolsheviks and the anti-imperialist orientation of the Soviet state birthed by the October Revolution." Essentially the same justification that Ho Chi Minh did for why he became a Marxist-Leninist. Briggs goes on to say, "I was at the time more interested, as you will gather, in the national liberation revolution than in the social revolution." So, in 1919, we saw race wars spring up all over the United States. We also saw thousands of black people, men and women, take up arms to defend ourselves, our neighborhoods, and our families. This was the context in which the African Blood Brotherhood developed. The African Blood Brotherhood was an exclusively black organization. Briggs remarks in his 1958 letter to Draper that the founding cadres were less than 20 people, all based in Harlem. Harlem in the 1910s and 20s was the center of New African political, economic, and social life, and any political organization for black self-determination needed to organize the masses of Harlem. At its peak, Briggs says, the ABB had only roughly 3,000 members, spread in what they called posts across the country. A post was basically what we would call a chapter. Most members were recruited through Briggs's Crusader magazine. Robert F. Williams would later borrow this title for his own revolutionary publication. Briggs goes on to say that he sought to struggle against the right opportunism and eventually the latent fascism of the Garvey movement, which was the predominant mass organization for black people at this time. Some of you all watching this may take exception to the characterization of Garvey as a proto-fascist, yet he himself described himself as such when questioned about the rise of Mussolini's movement in Italy. As a matter of fact, I will read that quote. Garvey said that we were the first fascists. When we had 100,000 disciplined men and were training children, Mussolini was still an unknown. Mussolini copied our fascism. So, that's Brother Garvey for you. Make of that what you will. The ABB was an anti-imperialist, pan-African, revolutionary communist, proletarian organization. It sought to combat Garvey's capitalist ideology, which sought to promote black business ownership and the growth of the black bourgeoisie as a base for the liberation of new African people, the continent, and diaspora. ABB also combated NAACP reformism. It promoted revolutionary integrated trade unionism, and it sought to unite black and European workers on a class basis. Briggs points out that the ABB was organized independently of the small communist movement, which was, at this period in time, overwhelmingly white and foreign-born at its inception. In essence, the ABB was an organically black movement inspired mainly by the experience of black proletarians in the United States and taking communism as a tool to realize our liberation. The program of the ABB is a militant and revolutionary one, a communist one. Namely, it centers armed struggle as a necessity of any race or nation that is serious about its liberation. The program says, might makes right, always has and always will. This is the key thesis of the program. And, spoken or unspoken, it is the key thesis of any communist program. It goes on to correctly highlight friends and enemies and a basis for black workers' organization. It centers new Africans, black people residing in the United States, as the leaders of the proletarian revolution of black people worldwide, due to us residing in the belly of the beast. It is also a smack in the face of Garveyite bombast and feudal fascist rhetoric. It is essential reading for all who desire to understand and learn from this period of black communist organizing. The ABB put this program into practice, shedding the blood of settlers at Tulsa in 1921, where it organized armed defense squadrons, to prevent the lynching of Dick Rowland, and also defended the black district of Greenwood. Vicky Osterweil points out in Defense of Looting that Tulsa was an embarrassment for the reactionary settlers of Oklahoma. Why? Because the ABB and the armed masses shot the shit out of them, killing, estimates say, several hundred. The ABB eventually ended up merging with the Communist Party of the United States, helping to form the American Negro Labor Congress. The Brotherhood was essentially liquidated, and the efforts of this formation went into building the Congress. In hindsight, we can see this as a mistake. While the Maoist Communist Party in the United States will, as a matter of course, be multinational, we should be wary of attempts to liquidate organic elements of the colonized proletariat into such a formation. We should press for autonomy and self-determination of these formations in practice, not just in words, and allow them to unite with the broader communist movement while also maintaining their carefully cultivated local ties, work, and development. Briggs in his letter points out that when he joined the CP, there were only two other black people in it, Otto Heiswood and a person named Hendricks, who eventually dropped out of the party. Throughout its existence, the CP had issues with getting and keeping committed black cadres. The party in the 20s and 30s guarded a certain level of prestige among new African sharecroppers and workers in the South. I recommend Hammer and Hoe for more on this, due to its principled struggle against Jim Crow and the fact that it engaged in material aid and organizing during the Depression years. But the CPUSA eventually fell prey to opportunism and revisionism, eventually leading to a mass exodus in the 1940s of committed black cadres who in many instances went on to build up the new communist movement of the 70s, Harry Haywood being the most notable among them. The CPUSA has not done anything useful since my grandmother was a little kid, and my grandmother was born in the mid-1930s. In essence, the African Blood Brotherhood holds a place in history as the first militant communist organization of new African people in the diaspora. Its main error was surrendering its autonomy to the nearly all-white Communist Party of the United States. This, as we now see, served as its eventual undoing. Hindsight, of course, is 2020. This is in Black Red Guard. Don't catch COVID.